And I just want to start by thanking Claire in particular for putting this all together. Claire and Steph, thank you so much for your hard work. This is my favorite meeting of the year, every year. And I really appreciate all of your hard work, Claire, so thank you. Recent events, we heard a lot about Helene this morning, have shown us that resilience is not something that just happens. It is built with strong planning and coordination and policy and sustained investment, and through hard work from people like those that are in this room right now. So in this session, we are going to examine the planning and policy tools that support community resilience. How are we translating the innovative science that's being done at research universities throughout the region into actionable policies on the ground, guiding development decisions? How are we aligning local, state, tribal, and federal planning frameworks to strengthen our communities against extreme weather events? And how are we ensuring that both the quantitative data and community voices are integrated into our policies that shape our preparedness, our recovery, and long-term overall resilience? I'm really excited to learn from our impressive panel of speakers today. And I just want to highlight two things before we dive in. I have asked each presenter for 3 things about themselves to share with you when I read their bios. 2 of those things are true, and 1 is a made-up lie. Gotta spice things up after lunch and keep it interesting. I'm not gonna tell you which is which, but I encourage you to seek them out, find them, talk with them, learn from them before the meeting ends, and see if you can figure out which one is a lie. The second thing is that I have award show music pulled up on my phone, and I've told the presenters that I'm going to play them off if they go over time, like we're at the Oscars. So if you hear that, I'm going to try and keep it quiet, but we're going to try and keep things going on time this session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first 2 presenters, Awilda, and apologies, I am not a native Spanish speaker. So Awilda Camacho Llanos is the president of G8, Grupo de las 8 Comunidades Aledañas al Caño Martín Peña. Did I do okay? Okay. In this role, she leads community-driven initiatives that promote self-management, environmental justice, and the holistic development of communities that make up this historic urban corridor. 2 truths and a lie about Awilda are that during the 1970s, she was actively involved with the Young Lords in Boston, Massachusetts. Her daughter lives in Seattle, Washington, and focuses on projects related to social justice, migrants, food banks, and multicultural communities. And she is actively involved with small farmers and agro-industry in Puerto Rico. María Inirio, thank you, is the assistant director of the Corporación del Proyecto Enlace del Caño Martín Peña. Her work focuses on ensuring the execution of the Comprehensive Development and Land Use Plan for the Special Planning District. Throughout her tenure at both the Enlace Public Corporation and the Caño Martín Peña Community Land Trust, she has held key roles in urban infrastructure, housing, project management, and the executive office. 3 things about Maria are that she was born in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico, and moved to San Juan at the age of 8. She did an academic exchange in Barcelona to expand her urban design studies, and she is obsessed with tables and Microsoft Excel. Please help me welcome Maria and Awilda.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's very important to mention that maybe I'm the only person that do have a volunteer job. I'm the leader of a community of Caño Martín Peña. I don't receive any salary. So welcome. I appreciate that you invite me to this presentation that we am going to share with my partner, María Inirio. So let's start. Okay, we have here the part of the Puerto Rico. This is San Juan. In the morning, it was very important that Manuel Lavoy presented the map of Puerto Rico, no? So we are in San Juan. This is part of the old San Juan and San Juan per se, that is Santurce also, that is the largest community of Puerto Rico, of San Juan. So we have here, you can see the water, that is the blue one, that is the El Caño Martín Peña. We can observe that El Caño Martín Peña is surrounded by the San Juan port, the financial district, the international airport, Luis Muñoz Marin, and the old town of touristic zone. I have her because she's very technological, I'm not. So when we see here is most of the Puerto Rican that came to Santurce, to the area of the Caño Martín Peña, they settled in that area, that we can observe the part of the Caño, that is San Juan, no, Santurce, and also we can observe all the area that was cleaned and settled by, on that occasion, by the government of Puerto Rico. We can, okay? And the Caño Martín Peña is part of, that I mentioned before, of San Juan, that is divided by the north and south of Puerto Rico, no? Of San Juan. We are 8 communities in Caño Martín Peña, that is Barrio Obrero Oeste, that is part of the north, Barrio Obrero Marina, San Juan, Barrio Obrero San Ciprián, Buenavista, Santurce, and in the south, Parada 27, Las Monjas, Buenavista, Atorrey, Israel Bitumur, that they're part of the 8 communities of the district of El Caño Martín Peña. We are part of the estuary of Bay of the Estuary of San Juan, that you can see all the line that is part of the water, that they're part of the 85% of the communities are within the 100-year event flood zone. That we can see, that we can observe that is part of our infrastructure that we are working right now with the flooding area, but at the same time, the engineer corps, they are helping. So, and they are funding also for the dredging. This is the experience that we have before and after Maria. All the flooding in our community areas that is part of the system that we are experiencing right now in San Juan. 10,097 residents of that part of the census of 2020 that right now they live in our area. Most of the residents, they are senior citizens. More of the residents is the flooding area that why? Because most of the residents that we have, based on the social economic profile, they moved to the United States, and in addition to that, we have different cultures, immigration, migrants. We have Dominican, we have Mexican, we have also from Colombia, etc. 25% of the employment rate is 25% is the unemployment rate. 20,807 are the average annual income. The 17% are elderly population. 10% they have bachelor degree or higher, and 20.4 no health insurances. Part of the okay, it's okay. I have only 1 minute, right? What do we more with less? Policy development is most effective when it emerges from within communities and is carried out by the communities themselves. It's very important to punctualize that this morning you talk about collaboration. We have collaboration with Enlace and the family and the land trust in San Juan. So these are 3 components of collaboration. The G8 is composed, what I mentioned before, for these communities, and we are part of the the G8, and you can see all the members of the community, part of the member of the community.
Okay, after the G8 was made and all the communities realized that they have to get together in order to have a better project, the first thing that they do was design a plan. And that design takes like 2 years in more than 1,700 of meetings, street by street, and in any park, in any place, in churches, in everything, just to they realize and design what they want for their communities in order not just to improve the communities, but to stay in their communities that they live for many years. So this plan was designed by the communities, but they realized also that they need this plan not to be just in paper. And they, for that, with a lot of collaboration, they create or they design and write a law that this law was approved in September 24 of 2004, so there's a lot of time. They are executing this project. And this law make a lot of things, but the most principal things they do is that, first of all, recognize the G8 as a community entity that works for those communities around. The second thing is that create a government entity in order to execute all the projects that were included in the plan. And the law asked to the planning board to adopt the plan that was designed by the communities, and also create a CLT, Community Land Trust, a nonprofit organization to administrate and be the owners of the lands that law passed to the communities. All the public lands in the area were passed to the communities. So as you can see, from the beginning, we keep doing all the exercise to go to the communities in every step of the way, not just at the finish or in the beginning, but in every step, asking the questions and designing and making everything we can do in order the communities be part of what they decide. So we, as you can see here, advocates community empowerment and organization and participation in different programs. And today, like more than 20 years later, we have a community that has complex projects made come true, like the dredging of the Caño Martín Peña, that is in accord with the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Corps of Engineers, and has taken like more than 15 years to come true, but also housing, infrastructure in order to prepare the communities for the future, recreational areas, and everything that is part of the plan that they designed too many years ago. For that, they realized that not everybody could stay where they were living. There are so many places that it's really difficult to live. So they designed a relocation committee, and they adopt the policy of the Uniform Relocation Act, the federal law, in order to have a better way to relocate families. And if they can stay in the communities, they can do also if they choose that. So as we have been talking all the morning, one of the keys is that we build partnership and we get collaboration of local and private or not private or
Further.
every organization that wants to help, not just for money, but with the knowledge that they have, has been made this project come true. And we realized that we have to do a plan that was not just engineered, but also includes social and economic development, with over more than 30 programs that we built there. So this is a long-term plan, as you can see, but we didn't realize in that moment that we were preparing ourselves and our communities to something that could happen in a short time, in an emergency moment, like the Hurricane Maria that was devastated for the communities of the Caño Martín Peña. This is just some of the examples, the people telling where the inundation was. So the thing that the communities were organized was key in order to act in a situation like this. And we started like from the basics, you know, just to have the maps and go street by street with the people that we have here. We don't have electricity, we don't have power, we don't have communication, and just to start to documentate what was happening with the people all around the district. Just walking and be the first face that the communities, people in the community sees. Then we start to organize different things that just the community tells us that they need. In this case, recollect debris, install tarps. You can see a little bit how the communities gets, and start to thinking and documenting how we can bring then a roof if they lost it, to have this amazing roof that was contracted by the GA, and preparing for all the things that people and agencies can bring to us in order to give it to people. The community center was the oasis, and the families receive help. Ooh, thank you for for this honor for me. It's an honor to be here today.
We are dancing.
And 17 external volunteers that they were there because they already know the G8, and they know and they trust the G8 and
Stop.
have him today.
Okay, we need to stop.
Stop it. Thank you.
Thank you both. As someone who works with communities, I know how difficult those conversations can be, and that list of partnerships that you had on there is just incredible. I cannot really wrap my mind around the scope of this work, so very exciting, and thank you for...
welcome funding.
Yeah, yes. I think everyone up here, if you have extra funding lying around, we would be happy to take it, I think. Okay. Oh, so next I would like to welcome up Grant McClure, who is the South Coast Office Director for the Coastal Conservation League. He focuses on local conservation initiatives in South Carolina as someone who is born and raised in Charleston, including managing land development projects, addressing erosion, and promoting policies on single-use plastics. 3 things about Grant are that he studied abroad in Denmark in college, he is fluent in 3 languages, and he writes with his left hand. So help me welcome Grant.
Excuse me. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work specifically with the Coastal Conservation League on St. Helena Island, which is a 64 square mile sea island in Beaufort County. A little bit about the history of St. Helena. I think that's important for this discussion. And it's great to be here. And the Coastal Conservation League, we're a 501c3 environmental advocacy organization, and our work really is, the core of our work, I think, is doing the grassroots advocacy. So engaging with the community, meeting them where they are, figuring out what the needs are, and how to implement policies that accomplish their goals. So this is St. Helena Island, again, 64 square mile sea island. The St. Helena Island community is unique, and it's unique really because of its history. And so actually in 1861, November 7th of 1861, the Union Army arrived in the Port Royal Sound, and a day that became known as the Day of the Big Gun Shoot. And so the economy of this region was really driven by the transatlantic slave trade. Specifically, Sea Island cotton and rice were huge cash crops. So people were unfortunately kidnapped from West Africa because of their engineering expertise and their knowledge of how to cultivate lands, and were brought over to this region, to St. Helena Island and other sea islands all up and down the East Coast. And so many folks in Beaufort County can still trace their lineages back to those times and have maintained those West African traditions. And so you may have heard the term Gullah Geechee. So many residents on St. Helena and landowners identify as part of that Gullah Geechee tradition and community. And so specifically in 1999, the St. Helena community got together to decide how they wanted their community to grow in the future as Beaufort County was growing. And so in South Carolina, we have our State Planning and Enabling Act, which allows for municipalities and counties to adopt comprehensive plans, which by state law are updated every 10 years, and then again are revisited every 5 years. And so one of the tools that we have in our toolbox to control growth is zoning. And specifically, we also have something called overlay zoning that can act as an additional protection over the top of what's sometimes called base zoning. And so St. Helena Island today is made up primarily of farms. There's quite a bit of black land ownership. And so the community got together and said, well, we want to preserve that and work to identify threats at the time. And one of the biggest threats was really the onslaught of coastal development, specifically gated golf courses and resorts. And so this is a map of the Beaufort area, which shows just how prolific this land use pattern has become in our region. Each red pin represents a golf course. We know that golf course technology has come a long way, but many of these are still pulling quite a bit of groundwater from the aquifer, competing with our farms. And so this is a prolific land use pattern, and it has the potential to push out some of these longtime landowners and Gullah Geechee landowners because it's typically associated with higher property taxes. And so that puts a burden on some community members that maybe don't have the resources to pay those higher taxes. And we see land getting lost at tax sales. And so understanding this threat, St. Helena proactively adopted what's called the St. Helena Island Cultural Protection Overlay. And that is represented by the green blob all around St. Helena Island. And you can see that up to this point, it's been successful. There are no golf courses, resorts, or gated communities on the mainland of St. Helena Island since the implementation of this zoning law. So it has been successful. But if you look to the south, you see Hilton Head Island. Once had a thriving Gullah Geechee community still. That tradition is still there, but it has been in many ways encroached upon. And so it is an interesting case study to look at those two islands and see how they look today. And so that brings us to Pine Island. And Pine Island is a 500-acre property. It includes a peninsula that's sometimes called St. Helenaville. It is wholly a part of St. Helena Island and within that cultural protection overlay district boundary. This property actually has 2 listings on the National Register of Historic Places. It also has quite a bit of frontage on Village Creek, the Morgan River, and Eddings Creek, which are really kind of at the mouth of the Ace Basin, one of our iconic conservation landscapes in South Carolina. And so this is a very special property, and unfortunately it fell into the hands of a developer from Boston in 2023 who is trying their best to do all 3 of the things that are restricted by the cultural protection overlay: a golf course, resort, and gated community. And so they have brought their proposal to Beaufort County. Here's just another zoning map showing the CPO going around St. Helena, and then looking at Pine Island within this black area. And so the community has shown up over the past 3 years, time and time again, to fight this golf resort proposal and defend the cultural protection overlay. And so I've had the opportunity to work with many of these community members, whether it's pastors or local fishermen or state representatives. It really has been empowering to see the community to come together on this issue. And so, again, this has been a battle. I call it a zombie project, right? It's like we have these great victories, and then it comes back up again, and we have to rally the troops again and again and again. And it can be extremely demanding work. It can be exhausting, but it's also really empowering to be able to be a part of the community. And so that's what I want to leave y'all with, is the fact that, I think we take for granted that these monumental decisions are happening every day in our backyards, at our city council and county council meetings. And in today's political climate that's so polarized, it can feel very difficult to make change. And so there really is power and strength in numbers, and you can actually still affect change at these local council meetings. And so, yes, we have been successful over the past 3 years in upholding the culture protection overlay zoning and defeating the proposed Pine Island Golf Resort plan. I have to give a shout out to my wife who created this banner. She's a professor at USC Beaufort, our local satellite campus for USC. Yeah, it's been a great privilege to work with the community and to hopefully we're advocating for a conservation outcome for Pine Island. We would like for the developer and their anonymous investors to come to the table and to consider a conservation purchase for Pine Island. And we've had some recent victories in both the federal court and state court that position us well to have those negotiations. And so we just need a willing seller. And so that's what we're working towards, and we're hopeful we'll get there one day. And whether it becomes a state park or a state forest, it's ultimately going to be up to the community. But again, this St. Helena CPO was something that was created by and for the community, and the community has really fought tooth and nail to defend it. So a critical issue. It's not just about the Pine Island development. If you allow an exception for one individual seeking to remove themselves from this district, it certainly opens up the door for other developers to come in behind them and erode the effectiveness of the overlay. So with that being said, I appreciate your time, and happy to answer questions after we hear from other speakers here today. So thank you. Oh, and actually one more thing. We have a website, protectsthelena.com. And here are just a few action items that you can do if you're interested in getting involved with our fight. So, thank you.
Thank you, Grant. This is something that, if you live in the Low Country, has been in the news for quite some time. Not only St. Helena, but similar kind of issues happening in Georgia on Sapelo Island, and a really great example of how communities can kind of come together and advocate for what they want. Thank you. Next up is Maddie Stanislaus, Esquire. Maddie is Vice Provost and Executive Director of the Environmental Collaboratory at Drexel University. He previously served as the Assistant Administrator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Land and Emergency Management, leading programs to revitalize communities through the cleanup and redevelopment of contaminated sites, hazardous and solid waste materials management, chemical plant safety, and oil spill prevention and emergency response. He also served as the lead EPA federal official incident command for major national disasters, including the Deepwater Horizon or BP oil spill in the Gulf. 3 things about Maddie are that he plays the steel drums. I feel like Maddie, as an aside, really got this assignment, so thank you, Maddie, for these interesting facts. Maddie plays the steel drums, he designs and builds koi fish ponds, and he was drafted to play baseball. So please help me welcome Maddie Stanislaus.
Thank you. Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Claire, and especially thank you for inviting a northerner to come down and talk to you all. So. I know it's a rare thing, right? Let me move this down. So a little bit about what we try to do is really try to take the university outside the university, right? And really have a co-leadership, co-development model, really led by community leaders, very much along the lines of our prior conversation. So just a little bit about my experience. So I used to preside over EOCs for multiple national disasters, Deepwater Horizon, Superstorm Sandy, and I learned a lot from really going to meeting communities where they are. A lot of times it was really after disasters, and one of the under-recognized aspect of incident command is the critical role of community partnerships, critical role of opening up, and there is a role for this hierarchy that is incident command, but it also gets in the way. it really gets in the way of community partnerships. When we were going around Louisiana, we had to fight every day to really engage communities where they are. Fight every day to bring communities not just to be a passive recipient of information, but to be a partner. It's communities, community groups that had the trust. They were the trusted messenger. But the incident command structure didn't, and frankly, doesn't really accommodate there right now. So one of my missions is really to reopen that process, you know. So, and that coupled with, we see a lot of funding and attention to greenhouse gas mitigation, some funding for adaptation, but really not much around how do you prepare and build capacity, resources, and the leadership of community-based organizations working with local government to address extreme weather. So we did consultations around the country with a real diversity of stakeholders, from residents who experience extreme heat, flooding, to public health officials, emergency management officials, energy, utilities, insurance and finance, with some kind of key national partners. So I'm going to really talk about some of, and it was really focusing on what are people doing, but where do they see the gaps in extreme weather preparedness now, given the increased frequency, severity, and consequence of these events. So you all know this, heavier downpours, more frequent, flooding is happening in places that's never happened before. As a data point, 93% of flooding in Pennsylvania occurs outside of designated flood zones. So this is from one community that we work with, the most flooded community in Philadelphia. 93% have an out-of-pocket cost, a median of $25,000. Some community residents have $100,000 out-of-pocket cost. And major concerns about evacuation. When to evacuate, how to evacuate, is it safe to evacuate, transportation, how do you get the elderly out, how do you get the folks with medical necessity. I have to say, I'm a recovering New Yorker, so I talk really fast, so you have to slow me down. Heat, we're in an era of heat. And I believe we're in a heat crisis, but I don't really think that all of society really appreciates and recognizes the heat crisis that we're in and its consequences. Wildfires, red flag notices are occurring regularly across the country. You know, and when I asked a crowd in Philadelphia how many people knew how to evacuate in a wildfire red flag notice, and like 1/3 of the people put their hands up, right? So I'll get to kind of the failures of early warning systems. So I just want to spend a little bit, we heard a lot earlier today about the economics, the under-recognized economics. So this was issued by an office that no longer exists at the Department of Treasury, the insurance office. The insurance office pulled data from private sector insurance companies and from state insurance agencies. And the big takeaway is this cascading consequence from extreme weather. So, you know, we are seeing insurance premium rising. We're seeing insurance not being available, and this is not just flood insurance. This basic property insurance being pulling out of markets. So one of the, I think the major things that is called out in the report is this cascading of less insurance, lower real estate values, financially upside down mortgages, creating risk for mortgage-backed securities, right? If you remember the 2000-2008 recession, right? It was fueled by the failure of mortgage-backed securities, right? And then a separate study by First Street talks about 30% of foreclosures is going to be due to extreme weather by 2050, right? And then real estate values dropping 20 to 40% in Florida with when you don't have flood insurance. There's also a proposal by a federal advisory committee for the federal government to get out of the flood insurance business, right? Flood insurance is responsible for 95% of the market currently. And there's a whole history of flood insurance, like if you want to talk about it, but the reason why it's a public insurance because the private markets cannot bear the risk and the cost of flood insurance, right? So if you get rid of public insurance, you get rid of flood insurance. And that means real estate prices will drop across the country. You know, so I just want to kind of hit you with that. But you know, this is done by a U.S. Chamber of Commerce study. in terms of the value proposition of investing today to avoid costs in the future. I use this 1-to-13 ratio all the time. And people talk about return on investment earlier today. Huge return on investment if we invest today, or huge cost if we don't. And if you look at the Chamber of Commerce study, it talks about how many jobs you will preserve, how much infrastructure you will preserve by investing today. So this is just a big snapshot, 2025 billion-dollar disasters. And I note in 2025, there was not a single hurricane that hit mainland U.S. It did hit the Caribbeans, right? And then in 2024, $27 billion disasters. But I just want to underscore, this is the billion-dollar threshold, but communities are experiencing sub-billion dollars that is not documented anymore. So NOAA is no longer collecting and disclosing billion-dollar disasters, right? In addition to lots of other kind of data withdrawal from the federal government. And then, you know, I get into some of the lives lost and the real risk. So, you know, from where I come from, we cannot approach today with yesterday's models, right? Yesterday's models of emergency preparedness, of response. The office that I used to run at EPA, we changed the title from emergency response to emergency management to underscore preparedness. You know, I think we really need to invest in preparedness and not response. Although we do need those assets, we do need those infrastructure in those episodic moments, but if we don't invest in preparedness, then the harm is far more significant. So, you know, and yeah, I'll get into in a moment. So, coming out of our consultation, we issued a report in 3 different groupings. One is community level. The second is local government community interface, and third is private sector community interface. And I'll give you a link if you want to look at this report. So I'll just highlight a few things. One, again, I want to underscore, this is about preparedness and community level preparedness. Highlight a few things. The deaths in Camp Mystic, the deaths in Maui, and the deaths in the California wildfires, a significant pattern was the failure of early warning systems. Some didn't get there, some were late, and some people didn't understand it. So a common theme, not only in the US or globally, is the real failure of early warning systems. And early warning systems being worked with community partners so people understand how to say it, what language to say it, and how will people receive those messages, and make sure we do it in a multiple of ways so it's received. Inclusion of vulnerable populations in preparedness planning. It is not something that's formally part, I have 1 minute left, formally part of the, you know, maybe I'll just kind of mention a couple other things. You know, a bunch of studies really talk about how community-based organizations have helped save their neighbors, help recover their communities. So we need to really bring community-based partners into the framework of preparedness and recovery. Again, maybe I'll mention 2 other things. In coming out of consultation with environmental commissions from about 5 states, one of the recurring themes is the failure of other agencies not being at the table. Housing, transportation, energy is really crucial to a unified one-of-government approach in preparedness, not just in response. Insurance is a huge, huge issue. And I think we need a public-private model that we currently do not have. There's some examples in Florida, examples in California. Those are frankly failing right now. So we issued an extreme heat memo, policy memo, to the city of Philadelphia. We'll get that to you. You know, we identified a number of gaps, working with community groups around the city. So there's a highlight of that. I just want to mention 2 other things. What some people call the double disaster. You know, that is a failure of chemical plants due to flooding. 3,000 facilities have had failures for the lack of backup power. And currently there's a proposal issued 2 weeks ago to get rid of that requirement in the current rule. So these are some of the additional requirements. If I had more time, I'll talk about it. And so, you know, again, we want to build out these policy memos that we've identified in the report. We're going to be launching a podcast and creating learning communities. And I'm going to be putting this all into a book sometime this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. I know it's quick. We got to keep people on their toes after lunch. We don't need people falling asleep. Thank you. Really informative, really important work, and I'm very much looking forward to this book. This is the first time I've seen the cover. Love it. Last but not least, up today we have Dr. Ashley Ward. Ashley is the director of the Heat Policy Innovation Hub at Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. She leads national efforts to quantify the economic and health impacts of extreme heat and translate those findings into bipartisan policy solutions. 3 things about Ashley are that she prefers cold weather to hot weather. She considered going to law school instead of earning her PhD, and her first concert was Motley Crue. Please help me welcome Ashley Ward.
See, I have a script, so I timed myself, so we're going to see how it works. It's really a privilege to be part of this conversation, and we've heard some really great stories about examples of communities designing resilience with intention. And my work is a little bit different, as Kait alluded to. At the Heat Policy Innovation Hub, we engage agencies and legislative offices across both the jurisdictional spectrum and the political spectrum on extreme heat. And what I want to share today is not so much what needs to change federally, but really what we've learned about how to move these conversations forward in such a polarizing environment. Because increasingly, resilience is not just a design challenge, right? It's also a translational challenge. Extreme heat is intensifying across every region of the country. It affects healthcare systems, labor productivity, energy grids, insurance markets, rural hospitals, military installations, you name it. But it doesn't fit neatly into the federal architecture. A lot of emergency managers in this room, you know, it's not a hurricane, it's not a wildfire, it's not a tornado. It doesn't fit in the disaster declaration process. It's not a single declared event. It's more like a chronic condition, especially in the Southeast. So advancing policy around it politically and institutionally can be very complex. And so I've put together like 4 lessons learned from my engagement with legislative offices across the ideological spectrum over the last year. So when we meet with congressional offices, we've learned something very simple but important, and that is when we lead with climate or even health outcomes, I want to really make sure that's clear, the conversation can narrow very quickly. Now, my background is in public health. Do I want to talk about people who get sick and die from heat? Yes, I do. Is that effective? No, it is not. So if we lead with things like fiscal exposure, healthcare strain, workforce productivity losses, grid stability, military readiness, the conversation opens up. The whole idea here is to bring more people to the table, not narrow who comes to the table. So we frame heat as a risk management issue, a fiscal stability issue, a continuity of operations issue, a public health systems issue. That kind of framing travels further. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Nor you saw that. So for example, when we discuss rural heat exposure, we don't begin with like global temperature curves or workforce protections, also very difficult to talk about. We start with things like rural hospitals that are operating on the margin, agricultural and manufacturing, labor productivity loss, small businesses closing early because of heat, counties absorbing unplanned emergency response costs. And when you do this, when you frame heat, and I think also many other issues that we're talking about today, it becomes bipartisan when it's an economic issue. That doesn't mean that we ignore climate science. It doesn't mean that we ignore the people who are vulnerable. It means that we translate risk into the terms that align with the decision makers we're talking to. So we've also learned that large standalone bills are not the only and even really the most effective way forward. In fact, much of the progress that happens quietly, and they're included in existing policy vehicles. Heat can be embedded into infrastructure spending criteria, defense readiness standards, housing and community development guidance, energy rulemaking, procurement specifications, always super exciting, and appropriations report language. And it happens with unbelievable impact at these levels. I know it's not sexy to say, I have this bill, but changing procurement practices changes the landscape and changes the game in serious ways. Legislative staff often then also respond more positively to these kinds of incremental integrations or clarifications on guidance or eligibility adjustments or cost benefit updates. So rather than kind of like sweeping new authorities that you want to propose, when we frame something that rather strengthens existing programs and doesn't create new mandates, the resistance to it drops significantly and the likelihood of success rises. Resilience can move forward through alignment much faster than it can through confrontation. A third lesson is about economics. Federal agencies rely heavily on cost-benefit frameworks to determine what gets funded. If heat-related impacts are not fully captured, and we heard this earlier today about, Alex talking in South Carolina, lost work days, hospital strains, rural exposure, long-term health costs, if these are not quantified, this has been a theme, I think, the whole day about how we quantify things, heat adaptation investments then appear less cost-effective than they really are. So at the Heat Hub, we focus heavily on quantifying sort of these cross-sector economic impacts of heat because numbers really do travel. When you can demonstrate avoided healthcare costs or stabilized workforce productivity or reduced strain on municipal budgets or reduced insurance volatility, the conversation kind of moves from like environmental spending to risk reduction investment. And it's a highly successful shift. And it matters because in bipartisan engagement, you don't want adaptation to be seen as charity, right? It isn't. It is fiscal prudence. And when it's framed that way, offices on both sides of the aisle listen. And then finally, this may be the most important thing we learn. District level specificity changes everything. When we bring county level or district level data into an office, it becomes tangible. Heat stops being abstract. It becomes my district, my hospital, my military base, my community, my farmers. And that personalization kind of reduces the ideological reflex. Heat, like most disasters, doesn't map really neatly into partisan geography, right? It really doesn't care what your politics are. It maps onto exposure. And it's important to remember that. Since I've been doing this work, we've had 12 years of a Democrat in the White House and 6 years of a Republican in the White House. We're talking about the same damn things right now as we did before that started, and nothing has really shifted. It is way too easy to fall back on thinking this is just a political issue. It is not. Quick example. This is an example of some of our research where we calculated the impact of heat productivity losses on local economies. On your left side, these are raw numbers, right? This is the average loss of GDP. This is retrospective. It's not what we think is going to happen, it's what we know happened over the last 20 years. On the left-hand side, what you see is these big county economies, right? Big economies, big money, big loss. When you normalize this by the size of the GDP, you see a very distinct shift in geography. Some of these rural counties that you see highlighted in the southeast experience 4 to 7% annual GDP loss. That is nothing to sniff at. And I'm going to tell you that's going to get the attention of every lawmaker in Congress. I see this map walk out of committee rooms. What this does for members of Congress is the person in Oregon who really cares about heat needs an ally in Louisiana. And the only way they get that ally is to say, look at what this issue is doing in your community. Let's work together and figure this out, right? This kind of information matters. Okay, so what does this mean for all of you? If you're seeking federal support and want to engage with legislators, and I would even argue you could do so on the state level too, think about volatility over vulnerability when you're talking to them. Quantify avoided costs wherever you can. Tie recommendations to existing structures rather than advocate for new ones. Avoid language that triggers partisan shorthand. But perhaps the biggest lesson of all that I can tell you is that resilience does not advance at the federal level by winning a debate. It advances by aligning incentives. One of my favorite quotes that was ever said to me back when I was even working in water, this country water manager from the middle of the Great Plains looked at me and said, "Don't ever bring data and science to a fight over incentives." That's probably the truest statement I've ever heard, and I've seen it play out dozens of times in my career. So thank you.
So while Claire is dealing with some technical issues, I am going to dive right in with the first question. Grant, this is for you. How can you galvanize a community to continue showing up at council meetings and not give up or lose momentum with the passage of time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something, sorry, I'm kind of echoey. Yeah, that's a great question, and something that we're definitely grappling with as the Pine Island fight continues. I think the more you can meet people where they are, I've got to leave Charleston to get back to the Penn Center this evening on St. Helena for a meeting at 5 o'clock, and just continuing to show up is a big part of keeping the momentum going and continuing to be there, to integrate yourself in the community, and showing up not just when you have an ask, but to be there as a community member, and just build those relationships. But it certainly is a challenge, and it's a great question.
Thank you. Next, we have a question for Awilda and Maria. How can someone with technical expertise communicate with community members how best to address the issues that they have at hand without disregarding their needs and worries?
Good afternoon. I mentioned before that we have a collaboration with 3 organizations. We have Enlace, that belongs to, it's a public agency that works in the community. We have the Land Trust, that also is part of the community, and G8. So the 3 components, we work together. They have expertise, they have technical advice, and we have social workers also. We have planners, we have architects, and with respect, we work together. How we work together? So it means that they can we provide the leaders, and the community, we provide our needs, and because they have the expertise in designs, etc., so they give us the advice on how to improve some areas of the communities.
Well, I should add the thing that we have social workers is really important in this communication between technical and the community members. Social workers are like ChatGPT for that communication between us, and even when we don't know how to bring some information to the communities, they share with us the knowledge of how to communicate and what exercise we can do, or how can we translate the information we have to the communities. The other thing is to have the community in every part of the process, because when you do a project, you learn in the process of all the decisions that you are making. So if you have the organization and the communities from the beginning, they're gonna learn the same way that we do in the process.
Thank you. Next, we have a question for Ashley. How have scientists responded to your information about what works for policymakers? Do you experience pushback, or do they seem to get it?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. There is quite a bit of pushback in some cases, but usually when someone, says, for example, I published this really important study and it shows this thing. My question to them is, okay, look, we're actually really good at creating like local action plans, and we're good at research on heat. But what is a C-suite executive supposed to do with that research? What is a staffer supposed to do with that research? So if you're actually looking for systemic change, right, you have to translate that research into something that's meaningful for the people who control the levers of power, and that is the investor class and the policymakers, right? And so, one of the things we do is we help work with them on how to do that. I mean, I myself am a scientist, right? So I understand how hard it is to make that transition. And there are some scientists and researchers who they really care about advancing the methodological foundation upon which we do research, and publishing in academic journal articles is totally fine. I'm not advocating that they stop doing that. What I'm saying is we have to do both and. There has to be those of us who can take that information and translate it into meaningful information for the people who do control those levers of power. And it's okay that not everybody do that. All of us have a role to play. And so usually that kind of tamps down some of the resistance. Like, it's not like I'm expecting you to do your science differently, right? I'm expecting you to help me translate that science into something for this particular audience. And so that usually helps alleviate a lot of pushback. And the results, I mean, in 1 year, last year, we launched a bipartisan House caucus on extreme heat in Congress, the first one that's ever existed. We did multiple congressional briefings. The last one, a bicameral bipartisan one, Senate and House, Republicans and Democrats. We have another one coming up in April. We had 60 offices show up to that bicameral briefing, and I did over 80 congressional visits. And they're not just Democrats, right? It's everybody. So I think, there are results that you can share with that. Also, as a result of that, there are 2 pieces of legislation sitting in committee right now that are designed to address the impact of heat on our infrastructure. They weren't there 6 months ago. So there is a result that we can point to about why it works.
Thank you. The last question I am going to direct to Maddie. As you mentioned, flooding outside of Philadelphia, how much of it can also be contributed to urban sprawl? Less aquifers due to urbanization creates more surface area to be inundated with rainwater.
Thanks for that easy question. So it's all of the above, right? I mean, clearly, the more impervious areas you have flooding, but if you take the Western North Carolina flooding, right? So it was a combination of extreme rain events, infrastructure that was not properly sized for that, right? So, I think it's a mistake to blame it only on urban sprawl, right? We're seeing rural areas flooding. So the data is the data, right? Precipitation events are more frequent, more intense, and happening in more places than ever before. And so how do we build the infrastructure, one, but also the soft infrastructure? How do we make sure people are prepared to prevent death and harm in the first place?
Thank you all for your insights and sharing your lessons and your knowledge and your expertise. I really appreciate it. And please join me in thanking our panelists.